Catherine Sterling existed in a world of polished glass and muted acoustics. Her penthouse apartment, a silent vessel navigating the sky above the city, was less a home and more a monument to absence. Every surface was cool to the touch, every line clinically clean. Wealth whispered from the minimalist art and the panoramic views, but it was a lonely sound, the hum of a machine running in an empty room. Grief had hollowed her out years ago, when a sudden, brutal accident had claimed her husband, David. She had responded not with tears, but with spreadsheets. She had encased her heart in the ice of his unfinished empire, tripling its value, building tower after gleaming tower. She had mistaken activity for life, and in doing so, had forgotten how to live. The only warmth in her sterile world was Lily, her 6-year-old daughter. But even that warmth felt distant, like the sun through a triple-paned window. Catherine loved her daughter with a fierce, protective ache, yet she connected with her through schedules and tutors, through gifts that were expensive but impersonal. She saw the quiet sadness in Lily's eyes, a mirror of the emptiness in her own chest, and it terrified her. She was a titan of industry who could command boardrooms and bend markets to her will, but she could not figure out how to bridge the quiet, growing distance between herself and her own child. Miles away, in a part of the city the skyline forgot, Daniel Grant lived in a world of sawdust and worry. His small apartment was filled with the scent of wood and the lingering ghost of his wife's lavender perfume. He was a carpenter, a creator of sturdy, honest things, but the work was sporadic, and the bills were constant. He was a single father, raising his 8-year-old son, Leo, on a foundation of love and dwindling savings. Loss had visited him too, taking his Sarah after a long, draining illness that had stolen her breath and their future. But unlike Catherine, Daniel had not built walls. He had dismantled them, piece by piece, to make sure his heart remained open for his son. He possessed a quiet dignity that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with resilience. He faced each day not with bitterness, but with a steady, quiet resolve. His hands, calloused and skilled, could mend broken furniture and, he hoped, could hold together the fragile world he was building for Leo. He worried constantly, a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of his calm demeanor, but he never let his son see it. For Leo, his father was a fortress, a man whose love was as solid and reliable as the oak he sometimes worked with. The mall was a cathedral of consumerism, a noisy, glittering chaos that Catherine usually avoided. But she had promised Lily a trip, a rare, unscheduled afternoon just for them. Yet, habit was a powerful current. Her phone buzzed, a summons from her office in Tokyo, a crisis that could not wait. "Just one moment, sweetie," she had murmured, her voice already shifting into the clipped, authoritative tone of a chief executive officer. She had handed Lily over to the care of a trusted security detail, a man named Thomas whose stony face was a familiar fixture in their lives, and stepped away to command her empire from 1,000 miles away. The call was a storm of numbers and projections, a language she understood better than the simple dialect of childhood. When she finally disconnected, a familiar sense of accomplishment warring with a sharp pang of guilt, she turned back. And saw her daughter crying. It was not a simple tantrum. Lily's small body was racked with deep, gulping sobs. She stood before the grand window of a toy store, her face pressed against the glass. Thomas stood nearby, looking awkward and helpless. Catherine's heart clenched. She had failed again. Rushing over, she knelt beside her daughter. "Lily, what is it? What's wrong?" Lily pointed a trembling finger at a display of dolls. "The Starlight Princess," she whispered through her tears. "You promised. You forgot." The words were a blade in Catherine's chest. She had promised. Weeks ago. A passing comment made between meetings, a promise buried under an avalanche of work. She looked at the display. It was nearly empty. A clerk, seeing her expensive coat, approached with an apologetic air. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. That was the last one. We're completely sold out." The finality of the statement made Lily's cries intensify, a sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak from a child who felt utterly and completely forgotten. It was in that moment, as Catherine stood frozen by a grief too big for a toy doll, that a man approached. He was not dressed in a suit, but in a simple, worn jacket and jeans. He knelt down, not to Catherine, but to Lily, putting himself on her level. He moved with a gentleness that seemed to create a small pocket of silence in the mall's cacophony. Daniel had been walking through the mall on his way home from a small repair job, the meager payment tucked in his pocket. He had heard the girl's cries, a sound that resonated deep in the part of him that was a father. He saw the wealthy woman standing stiffly and the security guard looking lost. But he mostly saw the child. He saw the pain. He had noticed one of the Starlight Princess dolls earlier, fallen from its perch and tucked behind a stack of board games, its box slightly dented. A flaw that made it invisible to most. He had thought of buying it for a friend's daughter but decided he could not spare the money. Now, seeing Lily's tears, the calculation changed. The money in his pocket felt heavy, then light. It was for bills, for food. But a child's broken heart felt more urgent. He spoke to the clerk, his voice low and calm. He pointed to the forgotten doll. A few minutes later, he was back, holding the imperfect box. He knelt before Lily again. Catherine watched, mesmerized, from a few feet away, feeling like an intruder in this intimate moment of kindness. "I think this one was just waiting for you," Daniel said softly to Lily, his eyes full of a warmth Catherine hadn't felt in years. He wasn't looking for thanks or attention. He was just fixing something that was broken. "She looks like she needs a good home." Lily's sobs subsided into hiccups. She took the doll, her small hands clutching the box as if it were treasure. She looked up at Daniel, her tear-streaked face breaking into a fragile, watery smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "Everyone deserves to feel happy," Daniel replied, his gaze soft. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, ruffled her hair gently, and then he stood up. He glanced briefly at Catherine, a simple, polite nod, and then turned and melted back into the river of shoppers, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Catherine stood rooted to the spot. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a mother clutching her expensive phone. The multi-million-dollar deal she had just closed felt like ashes in her mouth. Her world was one of transactions, of value given and received. This man had performed an act of pure, unprompted grace. He had paid for a doll with money he likely needed, for a child he did not know, and had asked for nothing in return. He had seen her daughter. Truly seen her, in a way she, her own mother, had failed to. A crack formed in the ice that had surrounded her heart for years. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. Holding her daughter's hand, Lily now quiet and clutching her new princess, Catherine stared into the crowd where he had vanished. She did not know his name, but she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that she had to find him. The memory of the man in the mall haunted Catherine. It played in a loop in the quiet theater of her mind, his gentle approach, the warmth in his eyes, the simple finality of his kindness. It was a stark contrast to the cold, calculated world she inhabited. Her days were spent acquiring companies and assets, but he had acquired something priceless in an instant, her complete and utter attention. The hollowness in her chest now had a new echo, one of curiosity and a strange, unfamiliar longing. She summoned Arthur, her head of security for over 2 decades. He was a man of quiet efficiency and unwavering loyalty, a relic from the time before David's death. He entered her office, his face as impassive as ever. Catherine, for the first time in a long time, felt a flicker of uncertainty. "Arthur," she began, her voice softer than usual. "I need you to find someone." She described the man from the mall, her description more focused on the feeling he projected than his physical features. He had kind eyes, she finished, feeling foolish. Arthur, however, merely nodded. He was accustomed to unusual requests, though this one felt different. It lacked the cold edge of business. Using the mall's security footage and cross-referencing the credit card transaction at the toy store, it took him less than a day. He placed a simple, thin file on her vast marble desk. "Daniel Grant," Arthur announced. "Carpenter. Widower. He has an 8-year-old son, Leo. Lives in the Rosewood district." Catherine stared at the file. The information was sparse, but it painted a picture of a life lived far from her own. A life of substance, not of surface. The word "carpenter" resonated with her. A man who built things with his hands, real things, not abstract empires of wealth. She dismissed Arthur and sat with the file for a long time, the silence of her office pressing in on her. What did she want? To thank him, of course. To repay him. She could write a check, a sum so large it would solve all his financial problems. But the thought felt profane, a cheapening of the moment in the mall. His act was not a transaction. To treat it as one would be an insult. It would be a reversion to the old Catherine, the one who believed money could fix anything. She realized with a jolt that she didn't want to be that person anymore. She wanted to see him again. To understand the source of his quiet strength. She made a decision that felt both impulsive and profoundly necessary. She would go to him, not as Catherine Sterling, the billionaire chief executive officer, but as Lily's mother. Daniel's workshop was a small, rented space tucked away on a quiet industrial street. The air inside hummed with the dormant energy of creation. It smelled of cedar and varnish, a clean, earthy scent that was the polar opposite of the sterile, filtered air of her penthouse. Tools hung in neat, orderly lines on the walls, and half-finished pieces of furniture stood like patient sculptures in the low light. Daniel was planing a long piece of maple, his movements fluid and focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He did not notice her at first. She stood in the doorway, feeling strangely out of place in her simple, yet still obscenely expensive, cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. She had deliberately dressed down, but she felt as conspicuous as if she had arrived in a limousine. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel looked up, startled. His eyes widened slightly in recognition. He put down his plane and wiped his hands on a rag, a faint blush rising on his neck. "You're the little girl's mother," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Yes. I'm Catherine," she said, extending a hand. "I wanted to thank you. For what you did for Lily." He took her hand briefly. His grip was firm, his palm calloused. It was the hand of a man who worked. "It was nothing," he said, gesturing around the workshop. "I'm sorry, I don't really have a place for guests." "No, it's wonderful," she said, looking at the grain of the wood, the honest curl of shavings on the floor. "Please, let me pay you for the doll. And for your trouble." She reached into her bag, but he held up a hand, stopping her. His expression was not offended, just firm. "Please don't," he said gently. Seeing her smile was the only payment I needed. "Really?" His refusal hung in the air between them, dismantling her power. In her world, everything had a price. His simple sincerity rendered her vast fortune irrelevant. She felt a disarming sense of vulnerability. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," he smiled, and the gesture reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "How is she?" "Lily?" The question was so simple, so direct. He was asking about her daughter. Not about her company, not about her name which he still did not know. "She's happy," Catherine found herself saying, the word feeling new in her mouth. "She hasn't let go of that doll. She named her Hope." A silence fell between them, but it was not awkward. It was comfortable, filled with the quiet hum of the workshop. To break it, to find a reason to prolong this moment, Catherine's eyes landed on a half-finished children's bookshelf, small and beautifully carved. An idea sparked. "Do you take commissions?" Daniel looked surprised. I do. Yes. I'd like one of these, she said, gesturing to the bookshelf. For Lily's room. For Hope and all her other friends. This, he could accept. This was work. This was a transaction he understood. Of course, he said, picking up a notepad and a pencil. I'd need to see the space, take some measurements. And so it was arranged. A few days later, Daniel Grant walked into Catherine Sterling's palatial mansion. He drove up in his old, dented pickup truck, a stark contrast to the fleet of black luxury cars in the circular driveway. He carried a simple toolbox and a tape measure, his gaze taking in the soaring ceilings and cold marble floors not with awe, but with a craftsman's professional eye. He was not intimidated. He saw the house not as a statement of power, but as a collection of spaces, of walls and corners that needed to be measured. Lily, shy at first, soon warmed to his gentle presence. He knelt down to speak with her, asking her what her favorite stories were, so he could make the shelves just right. Catherine watched from the doorway of the library, a room that housed thousands of books she never read. She watched this man connect with her daughter more in 10 minutes than she had in months. The icy walls inside her began to thaw, water dripping from a long frozen glacier. Over the next few weeks, as he built the bookshelf, they talked. He would come to the house to install it, and she would find reasons to be there, bringing him coffee, asking about his process. He spoke of his late wife, Sarah, not with overwrought sadness, but with a quiet, loving reverence. He told her about their simple life, their dreams of buying a small plot of land, of building their own home. He spoke of his son, Leo, with a father's unabashed pride. Emboldened by his openness, Catherine found herself sharing things she had locked away for years. One afternoon, as he was putting the finishing touches on the bookshelf, she told him about David. He built all of this, she said, her voice low, gesturing vaguely at the opulence around them. This was his dream. When he died, I thought if I just kept building, I could. I don't know. Keep him alive. But I think I buried myself with him instead. Daniel stopped his work. He turned to her, his eyes full of an empathy that asked for nothing. He didn't offer platitudes or cheap comfort. He just listened. He saw the wounded woman beneath the armor of wealth. He saw the loneliness she tried so hard to conceal. It sounds heavy, he said, his voice soft. Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes for the first time in years. It is, she whispered. In the quiet of her daughter's room, surrounded by the scent of freshly sanded pine, a bond was forming. It was built not on shared status or interests, but on shared loss and a tentative, burgeoning hope. He was a carpenter, and he was, with his quiet strength and unassuming kindness, slowly and carefully dismantling the walls around her heart. The quiet moments could not last. Catherine's world, a world of spotlights and scrutiny, was not built for the fragile, growing thing between her and Daniel. The collision was inevitable, and it was brutal. It happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon in a public park. For the first time, their two small worlds had merged. Catherine had brought Lily, and Daniel had brought Leo. The four of them were a picture of unassuming joy. They bought ice cream from a vendor, pushed the children on the swings, and sat on a bench, sharing easy laughter. For a few hours, Catherine was not a billionaire, and Daniel was not a struggling carpenter. They were just two single parents finding a spark of happiness together. She felt a lightness she hadn't known was possible. She watched Daniel lift Leo onto his shoulders, the boy's squeal of delight echoing in the clear air. She saw Lily take Daniel's hand, a gesture of simple, childish trust. In that moment, the cold mansion and the demanding boardroom felt like a different lifetime. This felt real. This felt like home. But they were being watched. A photographer, tipped off by a recently fired and deeply resentful executive from her company, was hidden in the bushes. The camera's lens was a predatory, stealing their private moment and twisting it into something ugly. The photo that appeared on the front page of a notorious tabloid the next morning was innocent enough: Catherine and Daniel sitting close on the bench, smiling at each other as Lily slept with her head in Catherine's lap. The headline, however, was poison. Ice Queen's new pet project: billionaire widow Catherine Sterling comforts herself with a carpenter. The story inside was a masterpiece of cruel insinuation. It painted Daniel as a cunning gold digger, a man using his son as bait to ensnare a lonely, wealthy widow. It portrayed Catherine as a pathetic, gullible woman, and ridiculed her for stooping so low. They used his modest address, his profession, and his financial struggles as weapons, turning his quiet dignity into evidence of his manipulative scheme. The firestorm was immediate and overwhelming. Daniel's life was turned upside down overnight. When he went to his workshop, reporters were waiting, shouting questions, their cameras like machine guns. They swarmed outside Leo's school, terrifying his son. His phone rang incessantly with calls from salacious news programs offering him money to tell his story. His world, once small and safe, had been invaded and desecrated. The kindness that had defined him was now being presented to the world as a calculated strategy. His integrity, the bedrock of his entire being, was being ground into dust. Catherine, shielded by gates and security, felt a different kind of assault. It was an attack on the most genuine connection she had made in years. Her first instinct was to fight fire with fire. She unleashed her legal team, threatening lawsuits, demanding retractions. She used her immense power to try and quell the story, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a glass of water. Her aggressive response only made the media dig in deeper, convinced they had struck a nerve of truth. The chasm the article created between them was immediate. Daniel, horrified and sickened, felt the crushing weight of her world. This was the price of knowing her. This chaos, this ugliness, this violation. He thought of Leo, his bright, innocent son, now afraid to go to school. The choice, for him, was brutal but clear. He called her, his voice strained and distant over the phone. "Catherine, I can't do this." "Daniel, I'm so sorry," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'm trying to fix it. My lawyers are." "You can't fix it," he cut her off, his tone flat with despair. "This is your world, not mine. I can't have my son be a part of it. I can't be a part of it. We can't see each other anymore. It's better this way." Before she could argue, before she could tell him how much he had come to mean to her, he hung up. The silence on the line was a physical blow. He had pushed her away, not out of anger, but out of a desperate need for protection. He was protecting his son, and he was protecting himself, from her. From the destructive power of her wealth and fame. She was alone again in her silent penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. The walls Daniel had so carefully started to dismantle were not just rebuilt, they were now fortified with guilt. He had brought warmth and light into her frozen life, and in return, she had brought a storm that threatened to ruin his. The separation was a gaping wound, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was the one who had inflicted it. She was gone from his life, and the emptiness was colder and deeper than ever before. The weeks that followed were a study in silence. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over Catherine's mansion, thicker than it had ever been before. The media frenzy slowly died down, moving on to its next victim, but the damage was done. The quiet moments in the park, the scent of sawdust in the workshop, the sound of Daniel's easy laughter, they were all ghosts that haunted her waking hours. She saw the toll of the separation most acutely in Lily. Her daughter had retreated back into herself. The new light in her eyes had dimmed. One evening, she found Lily in her room, carefully placing the Starlight Princess doll back in its dented box. "Hope is tired," Lily had said, her small voice heavy. "She wants to sleep for a while." The symbolism was a knife in Catherine's heart. Daniel, for his part, tried to piece his life back together. He changed his phone number and took a long, unpaid break from his workshop. He spent his days focused on Leo, trying to shield him from the aftershocks, reassuring him that everything was okay. But it wasn't. Daniel felt a profound sense of loss. He missed Catherine's quiet intelligence, the vulnerability he saw in her eyes. He missed the easy way their two families had begun to blend. He had cut her out to protect his world, but he had only succeeded in making it smaller and grayer. He had let the bullies win. Catherine realized she was at a crossroads. The old Catherine would have retreated completely, burying her pain under a new acquisition or a grueling work schedule. She would have accepted the separation as an unfortunate but necessary consequence of her life. But Daniel had changed her. He had shown her a different kind of strength, one rooted not in power or control, but in vulnerability and truth. Trying to fight the media with lawyers and money was her old way. It had failed. There was only one path left, and it was terrifying. It required her to do the one thing she had spent years avoiding, to be seen. Truly and completely seen. She made a call, not to her head of legal, but to the producer of a major network's most respected primetime news program. She agreed to a live interview, no topics off limits. Her team was aghast. They advised her against it, warning her that it would only reignite the scandal. Let it, she had replied, her voice filled with a resolve they had not heard before. The night of the interview, she sat in a starkly lit studio, a single camera pointed at her. She was not dressed as a chief executive officer in a power suit, but in a simple, soft blue dress. She looked directly into the lens, imagining she was speaking not to millions of strangers, but to one man watching from his living room. The interviewer began with the tabloid headlines, his questions sharp. Catherine didn't flinch. She didn't become defensive. "I'm not here to talk about them," she said calmly. "I'm here to talk about him. About Daniel Grant." And then, she told the story. She told the whole world about a cold afternoon in a busy mall, about her own failure as a mother, about her daughter's heartbroken tears. Her voice was steady, but her words were filled with a raw, undisguised emotion. She described the moment Daniel appeared, a stranger who saw a sad child and simply acted. "In a world where everything has a price tag," she said, her gaze unwavering, "this man performed an act of pure, selfless kindness. He bought my daughter a doll with money I now know he could not easily spare. And he asked for nothing. He wanted nothing." She then spoke of her own grief, her own walls. "For years, I have been living in a fortress of my own making. A fortress of wealth and work and silence. Daniel Grant, a carpenter, a man who builds things with his hands, he walked into my life and he started to dismantle that fortress with nothing more than his decency. He showed my daughter warmth, and he reminded me what it felt like to be human." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not wipe them away. She let the world see them. "The media has called him a gold digger. That is a profound lie. The only person digging for gold in this story was me. I was searching for something real in a life of artificial things. And I found it. I found it in his character, in his integrity, in his heart. He gave my daughter a $10 doll, and in doing so, he gave me back my soul. That is a debt no fortune on earth can ever repay." She took a shaky breath. "I allowed my world to harm him, and for that, I will be forever sorry. He is the kindest, most honorable man I have ever known. And I love him." The confession hung in the air, a stunning, powerful act of public surrender. In his small living room, Daniel sat motionless, watching the television. Leo was asleep in his room. The apartment was quiet. He had seen the interview announced and had watched with a sense of dread, expecting a carefully managed corporate defense. Instead, he saw this. He saw Catherine, stripped of all her armor, fighting for him, for them, with the only weapon that had ever mattered, the truth. He saw her tears, and something inside him that had been broken and bruised began to heal. He had pushed her away to escape her world, but here she was, tearing that world down on national television for his sake. He had been so wrong. Love wasn't about hiding from the storm. It was about holding on to each other and facing it together. He didn't think. He just acted. He grabbed his keys and drove, his old truck eating up the miles between his world and hers. He didn't go to the mansion. He went to the television studio. He waited across the street as a small crowd of reporters gathered, buzzing about the interview. When Catherine emerged from the building, she looked small and exhausted, flanked by her security. Her public battle was over, and the vulnerability on her face was immense. She looked up, and her eyes scanned the crowd, searching. And then she saw him. Daniel stepped out from the shadows of a nearby awning and walked toward her. The reporters turned, a new frenzy beginning, but he didn't see them. He only saw her. Her security team moved to intercept him, but Catherine held up a hand, stopping them. He stood before her, the streetlights casting long shadows around them. The noise of the city, the shouts of the reporters, it all faded away. "I saw," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Tears streamed freely down her face now. "I meant every word," she whispered. He closed the small distance between them, placing his hands gently on her arms. "I know," he said. "And I was a fool to walk away." He looked at her, the billionaire, the mother, the woman who had just bared her soul for him. "I love you, Catherine." In the middle of the street, under the harsh glare of the city and the flash of cameras, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss of reconciliation, a promise made not in a quiet park, but in the heart of the storm. They were no longer hiding. They were facing the world, together. 1 year later, the chill was gone. Not just from the autumn air, but from the very center of Catherine's life. The storm of publicity had long since passed, leaving in its wake a story that had unexpectedly captured the public's imagination, a tale of kindness, courage, and improbable love. But Catherine and Daniel had retreated from that public gaze, seeking not applause, but authenticity. They did not live in the cold, glass monument in the sky. Nor did they live in Daniel's cramped apartment. They had found a place in between, a beautifully restored farmhouse nestled in a valley an hour from the city's frantic pulse. Daniel, with his own hands, had sanded the old floors and rebuilt the hearth, turning the once neglected house into a home filled with light and warmth. The magnificent bookshelf he had built for Lily stood proudly in the sun-drenched living room, now overflowing with books for both Lily and Leo. The change in Catherine was profound. The tense, guarded lines around her eyes had softened. Laughter, once a rare and precious currency, was now spent freely. She had stepped back from the daily operations of her global empire, promoting a trusted successor and shifting her focus to a new, more meaningful kind of construction. She sat on a thick, comfortable rug before a crackling fire in the new hearth. The scent of burning oak filled the room. She was on the floor, at eye level with the children, building a wobbly tower of wooden blocks with Lily and Leo. The two children, once from separate, lonely worlds, now bickered and giggled with the easy familiarity of siblings. Daniel came in from outside, his cheeks pink from the cold, his arms loaded with firewood. He paused in the doorway, a deep, contented smile spreading across his face as he watched the scene before him. This was the life he had once dreamed of with Sarah, a life of simple joys and deep-seated peace. It was a life he thought had been lost to him forever. Yet here it was, rebuilt and reimagined in a way he could never have predicted. He set the wood down by the fire, and Catherine looked up at him, her smile mirroring his own. The love between them was a quiet, steady thing, as solid and dependable as the old stone walls of the house. It needed no grand pronouncements, no public displays. It lived in these small, ordinary moments. "The first board meeting for the foundation is tomorrow," she said softly, her hand reaching out to rest on his. "The Lily and Leo Foundation," he said, the name still feeling new and wonderful on his tongue. It was their joint project, a charity funded by Catherine's vast resources and guided by Daniel's grounded perspective. Its mission was simple and direct: to provide support for single-parent families, to fix broken things, to offer a hand to those struggling in the shadows. Her wealth now had a purpose beyond accumulation. His integrity now had the power to create change on a scale he had never imagined. Lily looked up from her blocks, her eyes bright. She held up the Starlight Princess doll, still her most cherished possession. "Hope wants to come to the meeting, too," she announced seriously. Catherine and Daniel exchanged a look, a shared, silent understanding passing between them. He had given their daughter a doll named Hope, and in turn, had brought the real thing flooding back into all their lives. They had faced the storm and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but whole. They had taken the broken pieces of their pasts and, together, had built a new future, a family forged not by blood or by wealth, but by a simple, transformative act of kindness in a crowded mall. The fire crackled, casting a warm, golden glow on their faces, a perfect light for their new beginning.